Jay, you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Yeah, we will. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Abdel, for this. Welcome to session 5 of the National Hemp Research and Education Virtual Conference. I'm Jay Noller, a professor at the Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, and it's a lovely day here in the Pacific. And we have today our session on the testing, processing, and post-harvest considerations, where we'll take you through an arc of the really what happens with your crop as you're harvesting or just after harvest, and what one does to bring it to market. What does one need to look at? So we're going to be looking at really the 3 different types of hemp, and moving on through the processing of those. A bit of housekeeping at this point. So keep in mind that you need to be muted throughout these presentations. If you have questions, please use the chat function. And we'll be monitoring that so that we get a sense of where, what your interests are, what your questions are. If for some reason we get Zoom bombed, that is, somebody comes in, they're disruptive, and we just can't manage it, we apologize for that. We will do our best to move the disruptive person out of the session. If we cannot remove them quick enough, then the meeting will be ended. And we ask that you try to rejoin in about 5 minutes or maybe a few later, so that we can bring you back in and get going. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and do an overview presentation, and then I'll bring in and invite each of our guests and their recorded presentations in sequence. And hopefully you have the agenda in front of you. So I'm going to talk about the post-harvesting processing session today. And when we look at what we're going to be covering, we're going to look at grain. So seed, where it goes on to a, which is, we'll see in some of the types, seeds are not desired by some producers. But here where we have the grain is used for the oil, for the meats, etc. And essentially we're looking at the seed crop, which has a lot of the desires for the sort of petroleum substitutes. So when somebody's thinking of plastics, potentially that could be coming out of this as well. We're going to also talk about the stalks or fiber hemp, and that's going to involve a number of different processes when one is considering the bast fiber, which runs on the outside of the stalk, and then of course the hurd fiber on the inside, and the wood that we can see in between. And there's a number of different means of processing, and certainly when I look at our research that we've been doing over with the ultrafine textile fiber industry in China, is the use of many different types of decorticators to get to a certain endpoint, and those endpoints all have a certain level of quality, as well as industrial or even domestic, and of course clothing, ropes, etc., paper. So after, in addition to that, we're going to talk about the processing of flowers and or biomass. So that's where the top, or at least the gathers of flowers are harvested, and they move off into the products that really are driving the present U.S. Market. And of course, the biomass is seen as whole plant or large parts of it that are also moved through extraction. And there's many different end uses of the extracted and processed materials, including feed, which we have currently animal feed trials with post-extraction biomass. We're also going to be talking about testing. Testing is critical when we look at crop that is unlike really any other that we have in the U.S., where compliance means that one is potentially felonious versus being a licensee with a fully compliant product. And so in that case, we're usually looking at your tetrahydrocannabinol, and whether that's a total or certainly by federal law, the Delta 9. So we'll be talking about that as well earlier in today's session and just before the break. So that will give us this full sort of view of this, the idea of our post-processing and the post-harvest considerations. When we think about, what is the movement in terms of the types of crop products out there, one way is to consider looking at the what is the demand just within a search service. So we can look at this in terms of hemp fiber and hemp grain, and we can see since the Farm Bill of 2014, this is a 6-month running average on just the Google, and we see the increase in the number of normalized for the full 5-year and a half span that you see here. That shows that there have been periods, especially at the beginning of the 2019 season, there's a peak, and we can see there's and again, because it's a 6-month running average, it kind of tails off a bit at the end, but fiber and grain overall showing an upward trend. Now we can compare this to just search on CBD, and so that's the post-extraction of the floral essential oil hemp. And we can see that that reached a peak last season and trailed off significantly, and looks like it's coming back up during this season. So overall, when we look at our presentations today, we are considering what are the products and where people are in the U.S., particularly those involved in the industry. So we will be able to look at how the named products that have been imported into the U.S. are being substituted by U.S. producers. That also means that we're looking at a industry that is still new, it's still young, it's still in its nascent early stages. And so I think that's one of the things you're going to hear from our presenters today. We've pre-recorded the presentation so that we'd be able to keep them on time, but also so that we could really devote some time to your questions. So we've reserved several minutes between the presentation, so hopefully there'll be some discussion or at least questions that they'll be able to address. I think a common thing you'll hear through this is that we're learning, and you'll hear from industry leaders what they need to learn, and that's one of the purposes for this conference. For many of the attendees, they're researchers in private as well as academic entities, and they are looking for these folks are going to give you ideas. We need certain things taken a good look at in order to see what's going to happen with their particular sector. And we'll see that maturation has occurred significantly, but there's still quite a bit coming up. So when we look at our session today, we have a group that admittedly, you'll see that these are folks I've been working with one way or another in the West. I was unable to get colleagues that work with overseas, but then that wouldn't really give us a good idea of what's going on in the U.S. They would tell us, oh, we've been doing this for a long time, it's like this. So that's will be my part that I'll certainly bring to some of the questions today that you have. But again, it's going to be, can we think of what opportunities for deeper inspection to create greater efficacy, that is efficiencies for the particular sector. So with that, what I want to do is to look at our next, our first speaker today, and that's Tanya Farman. Tanya Farman is with Hemp Northwest and also Queen of Hearts hemp grain company out of the Dalles, Oregon. If you haven't been there, do visit. It's on the lovely Columbia River that divides states of Washington and Oregon. And so Tanya has been involved in this business for many years. And when we think of the grain sector of hemp, a lot of it's nascent, but we see that she's going to be able to show us what sorts of products that can come out of that, what are the considerations, and also you'll hear what is what she finds as critical needs for grain hemp. So with that, I'm going to ask that our Colorado State colleagues turn on the first presentation, and Tanya's in the background. I can see her, and she'll be here to answer questions at the end of this.
Quite a list of items, but we'll start here with the main reason and purpose of the growth and the advantages of hemp grain in the sector. One is that we have FDA GRAS approved status, and we received that in 2018 with the federal farm bill. It is an FDA approved status that means generally recognized as safe, which basically identifies an ingredient to go safely into any food product. So the hemp-derived products, or ingredients rather, that do have that GRAS status are toasted seeds, hulled seeds, or hemp hearts. When we press for oil, we of course get the nutritional hemp seed oil, and then we get the seed cake, which is the crushed seed residual from pressing for oil. And you can see in that photo, it's all crushed and held together there. And then further down the line, we will mill and concentrate that seed cake into flour or protein powder that can be used for baked goods and such. So the seed cake also, when you break it down, it's just a meal. That's also important as well, but I don't have a picture of it. So the graft status is really important because it really allows us to go into all the human consumption markets. And I just kind of put together a little graphic here for just touching the surface. This is a very oversimplified graphic, but different uses for pressed oil. For the hulled seed right now is all into the human consumption market, into food and value-added foods and as a single ingredient. The fines, butter, and dough, that's the residual material from pressing for oil. So lots of different opportunities there. The feed market, animal feed, other industrial uses. The fines are what's left over after dehulling the seeds for the hearts. Butter and dough is left over from pressing for oil. It's what collects in the bottom of the bucket or the top of the bucket from pressing for oil. And these are products that we don't have markets for right now, or ingredients we have markets for. Then the seed cake, the protein powder, gluten-free baking flour. That's one benefit of hemp, is it is naturally gluten-free if it is harvested correctly, gluten and wheat, or allergen-free. It also could be used potentially as a fertilizer, compost, and many other industrial uses that we don't know yet. So currently in market right now, the primary uses are nutritional oil, dietary supplements, cosmetics and body care. The hulled seed is in food products. And then the seed cake that is then milled into protein powder and gluten-free flour. But I have a caveat here, big disclaimer, is that out of all of these products, very few are actually in natural mainstream markets. And I'll kind of go into why that is, but it is, it's a marketing issue. But the body care is actually a big area for hemp seed oil that may not be food grade. The hulled seed in hemp milk is one of the biggest growth areas in the natural food market. And nutty topping for food, if you're not using hemp hearts already on everything on all of your meals, you should be. And then the value-added foods is another area where hemp hearts are being widely used, as well as a little bit of meal and protein powder. So growth areas, I put animals huge here, and the reason we'll go into a little bit in a little bit, this growth area and the advantages. It is the biggest opportunity right now, and it is also one of our greatest challenges. Human market, there's definitely opportunity in the nutritional immune boosting market. And that is, again, something that we need to work on in regards to education and awareness and marketing. It's really being overshadowed, the superfood ingredients being overshadowed by the cannabis confusion, if you will. But there's huge potential and growth there. And then the non-food grade, this is really what's interesting to me, because I think it is actually a huge growth area, is if we're not passing food safety and microbial tests at the grain level, at the farm level, and we can't bring that grain into a processing facility, where does it go? What do we do with it? Or even if it's processed, where then can it go if it's not food grade? And there's quite a bit of opportunity there as well. So that's just kind of a little bit of where our opportunities are, and kind of those growth areas and kind of the advantages of hemp grain.
Thank you, Tonya. That answer kind of brings up the question of there are certain text points there that you didn't highlight, didn't bring up. And I'm kind of thinking that markets aren't available, they're not open. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so there's a number of challenges in our way, and we really need to get through these barriers to open up markets. And the animals was a big one, so I'm going to jump into that. The animal feed and supplement market, there is work being done right now on animal feed market. Let me go back to this lovely slide. The FDA GRAS approval is only for human consumption. So this is really important because animals actually cannot eat the hemp hearts that we eat on our salads and our yogurt, and cannot actually have that hemp seed oil or seed cake, even though it is known to have wonderful nutritional value. And that's a huge barrier right there, is the animal market and not having it open. What we really see right now is there's kind of some low-hanging fruit, if you will, for the animal market. One being that hemp seed oil for the equine market is known to anecdotally have wonderful anti-inflammatory benefits. And the seed cake and meal we're seeing has some incredible benefits as well for helping calming effects, and also some additional anti-inflammatory. So I want to go into kind of what happens here and why the animal market is so key. Is one, you can see that picture on the left where we're pressing for oil and all that seed cake piles up. So the seed cake, 1 ton of grain produces about 48 to 50 gallons of oil, but it also produces about 1,400 to 1,500 pounds of seed cake. And right now we've got markets for the hemp seed oil. Again, they're not GRAS approved on the animal market, but there is so much demand and discussion already in the equine community that these products, these ingredients are so efficacious for their animals that there is a demand for it. But a state like California you can't even bring hemp seed oil across the state lines. So with that hemp seed cake, when you're getting that kind of mass and volume from pressing for seed oil, there's nowhere for it to go. It piles up, and it is basically waste if we don't have a place for it, if we don't have a home for it. So one concern that the FDA has as to why, people probably ask why aren't these GRAS approved? The concern is that there will be trace THC amounts in the food that we eat when it gets into livestock. So humans can eat it. It has GRAS approval for humans, but for our livestock and for our supply chain, it is not approved yet. So there's a great need to get by that barrier. That seed cake, that hemp seed oil, I'll go into kind of the nutritional profile here. This is why it's so important for us to get it passed through the equine market, because we don't eat horses in the United States. They are not livestock. Now, they are in other countries, but here in the United States, this should be a channel where we should get this approved for safety. So the nutritional hemp seed oil for the equine market, it has all 10 amino acids, and it has a really ideal ratio of those amino acids in comparison to soy and flax and other nutritional oils that are fed to horses. And then it also has that anti-inflammatory omega-6, the gamma-linolenic acid, that is highly preferred in the equine market too, which is another anti-inflammatory oil. So we've got, and then also the seed cake, the 30% protein and the 30% fiber. So that seed cake, that with that kind of profile, that's an incredible feed balance when you're looking at that. It's not economic right now, so we're selling seed cake at about $500 to $600 a ton, give or take $100. You can get other feed for half that cost. And so it's not, right now, it is not conducive to the animal feed market because of the costs involved. So livestock and other animals, we really need to get into those markets to be able to move this material and get research done in both the equine and livestock areas. Yeah, any questions on that? I guess wait at the end. Okay.
Sure.
The other point is the regulations. Regulations is a big one because we don't have federal support of the hemp farmers. So we need USDA support of the hemp farmers. Right now they don't. Look at the Canadians. They've been doing this for 20 years. They've done a fantastic job. They are fantastic at their grain. This is where they started in hemp, unlike us, where we actually legalized marijuana in some states before we did hemp. So there's a lot of confusion there. But we need to regulate the grain industry like a grain and not like CBD. That's one big piece of the regulation. The other thing is 80% of the hemp grain grown in the United States is grown along the Canadian border, North Dakota, eastern Montana, Minnesota, which is right where they're growing it in Canada. It's basically the same land and the same kind of land and soil. So it needs to be treated the same. The other big two are licensing. Right now, as a hemp grain farmer, you have to pay the same in licensing fees as if you were growing for CBD. We need to drop those license requirements. That adds additional cost. The other big cost that is prohibitive is the THC testing requirements. And we have established grain varieties, many of them that come from Canada. They've done their work and we know that they are valid, and we believe that this THC testing requirement should be dropped for those established grain varieties. So these are big factors that come into how it makes it cost prohibitive to grow for grain. And then lastly, the subsidies. Canada subsidizes hemp transport to get into export markets. And that's a great value. So that's just a part of what helps on the federal level. Another piece to opening markets is standards. So growing and harvesting standards right now, it's kind of the Wild West. There are farmers that are trying to grow hemp like wheat, or whatever they grew before, and it is a different beast. The other thing is storage and on-farm infrastructure. So at what point after harvesting do you put it on air, and for how long, and what are the details and the specs of that? The consolidation of commodity co-ops has led to farmers really consolidating that storage. And with hemp, because we have a raw and gluten-free, wheat-free ingredient that we want to keep that way and keep it food safe right now, we need to have on-farm storage and be able to test from each of those bins, or find a solution that will get us to the point where we don't have to do that. So that food safety challenge is big. And then that goes into the microbiology and the food safety testing. So what are the allowable microbial limits before grain can be safely received in a processing facility? And then human versus animal. The microbial limits for human consumption might be different from animal consumption. For instance, we had some limits of listeria that were too high for human consumption, but could possibly go into the equine and the livestock market. So at what point do we know to be able to receive that grain, one, and then if we do receive that grain, is it going to go into a different processing channel that is non-food grade? Lastly, and I think Bill is probably going to go more into this, but I just wanted to touch on it, was the labeling and the language around hemp. Labeling right now it's a bit rogue, if you will. And I think that the CBD and some of the unregulated sectors are kind of taking advantage of this non-standard, or kind of this gray regulation, if you will, about speaking to hemp oil versus hemp seed oil, CBD oil. I've had people that ask me, can they get high from hemp seed oil and hemp hearts? If there are standards set, we can communicate those standards, and that kind of goes all across from farm all the way to market. And then lastly is marketing. I like to call this a consumer cannabis conundrum confusion, because it really is. People are very confused about hemp, and even more so now that the Farm Bill has passed, ironically. People don't understand that cannabis is both hemp and recreational medical marijuana, and that it really needs to be communicated as to what the differences are. So that is a marketing challenge that we need to address as an industry. Unfortunately, again, I think that it feels like the CBD industry takes advantage of that a little bit. On the food side, people don't know if an edible is a hemp heart or if it's something that they take for sleep. So really defining that and setting the standards, as I previously mentioned, to address the consumer. The USDA checkoff program, keeping it separate from CBD, we feel is really important. Collecting those funds from producers to promote and do research on hemp. Grain side, we have a marketing problem, and we really need to keep those separate. The U.S. Hemp Grain Association is a grain-specific association that is in development right now. And really, the association is planning on addressing a lot of these challenges and the goals of having a hub for information, and then while also pushing for regulations and standards, and of course to open up markets so that more farmers can grow and get paid, and really have this be a supply chain that works for everybody in it.
Wow, great. Thank you for that. So if we look at, sort of the downstream research needs for grain, you talked about Canada. It's already been doing it for 20 years. So I can imagine that maybe a number of problems at scale have been sort of worked out, especially if you look at the production yield over time from Canada. In the few minutes we've got left here, what would you say in terms of for research? What do you see?
Well, I think research, number one, to move material, to get these markets to open up, we need research in the animal market. The equine market, again, like I said, low-hanging fruit. There's already efficacy there. We need to get it proven. We need to move forward that and open those markets. The other thing is finding homes and getting nutritionals, finding homes for the hemp butter, which we get 94 pounds per ton. And that's one kind of lost waste material. And then the hemp meal, where we're getting 1,400 pounds per ton. Lots of opportunity there, and not quite sure what it is, but that is the 30% fiber and 30% protein. The other items is more data-driven, which is a couple of things we're really interested in on the food side is, does the seed uptake and transfer contaminants such as heavy metals, pesticides, when we bring it into the processing facility, and then as a grain seed, and then when it's processed. That is really something. There's a lot of assumptions that the outer shell or the hull is a barrier or protects the seed from contaminants, but we don't actually know that. So it'd be a nice story to tell, and we could save a lot of money for our testing. And then how does that compare to the flour? The flour is, we know that it does take up something, but what is it compared to the seed? And then in livestock, do hemp nutrients such as fatty acids and such, do they transfer to an end product? So on the Hemp Feed Coalition, which is doing research work to open up animal markets, there is a company that is looking to feed hemp meal to chickens to increase omega value in the eggs and promote it. So what if we did that for cows? What if we do that for chickens? What is the nutritional end product or nutritional value in that end product? Is there any? How does it transfer? That's a big one. And I know there's many more. I'm going to steal this one from you, Jay, is on the genetic side. I would love a hull-less seed. I really think that's the future. That would save millions of dollars and probably be a fantastic seed. The nutritionals for having the ideal hemp seed variety would be fantastic. Right now, it gets compared to flax and fish oil quite a bit. And we would love to see an omega-3 high valued hemp seed that can grow right on our soil that actually tastes good, because we know that no one wants to take fish oil and flax oil because they're just not tasty.
All right. So again, thank you, Tanya, for that. We actually have some questions now live here on the last Wednesday of July. And I see one that says, what's this about grass status? Why don't we have grass status for animals being able to eat hemp seed if humans can? And I think I have an answer, but I would like to hear your idea.
Is that for me, Jay?
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Tanya.
Well, yeah, so the grass status for animals is they need to see safety across every ingredient. And right now they're looking at each byproduct of the hemp seed as a separate ingredient, even though it is basically essentially the same. And they're looking for it for each species. So that's a long process. It's an expensive process. And I had put that in the chat as well, that each species of that is lamb, that is equine, that is chickens, and the list goes on. So, and you may want to add to that as well, Jay.
Yeah, so we have our animal scientists at Oregon State are currently feeding it to lambs. It'll be going to lactating sheep. We have hemp biomass, so that's different than grain, of course, going to livestock. So that'd be for as a cattle feed or amendment. And of course, grain for poultry is another one. So yeah, they're all separate. They all have, still trying to get the FDA to, can you give us a blanket? Like we're saying we want to do this, this, and this. Can we just like carbon copy it, run it out? And they're like, no. So that continues to slow up not only us, but other researchers across the US who are involved in this, is that, so we've been looking at developing a consortium of researchers so that you can basically drop it in, and then now you have many different institutions run on top of that. So, and
I don't know if I made it clear in the presentation, but what each of these grain processors have is tons and tons and tons of the hemp meal and seed cake left over from pressing for oil. So until we move that material, it is either waste right now, really wonderful, high quality waste. And I know processors that just dump it, or they put it in a field, or they, it goes into landfills. So that to move that material and open those markets, and we know that it has an incredible nutritional profile. We're seeing efficacy, at least anecdotally, on the equine side. People say that they're feeding it to their pigs and their cattle, on their own ranches, and seeing great results. But yeah, so it really is not so much just a grass status FDA. I mean, that is where we have to get to, but it really is holding up the market on the processing side, and markets, I should say.
Yeah. I got one more question here, and that is on hulless seed. Well, it isn't exactly hulless. It's just that the hull itself isn't as heavy and thick. So one of the things that we breeders here at Oregon State have a what they call a naked barley. So it's hulless from the sense that that which keeps one from wanting to eat it as a human. It's that outer thick hull is actually out. It's not there in the plant. So I think, yeah, I certainly hope that we have a number of breeders who are on here, and I think they heard the quest. So thank you, Tanya. We're going to catch up with you at the end of this, the last talk.
Thank you.
So appreciate that. And before I jump into the next presentation, I want to remind everyone that there's a survey out for this session. We'd like to hear your perspectives on it, but more importantly, it's really so that next week, our last week for this conference is our focus groups. And so those focus groups will have a number of issues, questions, and it'll be survey dependent how we weight that. So please do fill that in. All right, so with that, I want to introduce our next speaker, again with recording and in a Q&A manner. And this is with Kevin Hounshell. Kevin is an analytical chemist with almost 20 years experience. He received his bachelor's from the University of Oregon while working at NASA Research Lab. In 2013, he was founder and lab director of the first dedicated cannabis testing laboratory in Oregon, and that's been very influential for all of our labs here in Oregon in particular. And after running that operation for 5 years, he left to start a consulting research company, Pure LLC, which offers consulting and analytical services in this sector. So with that, let's queue up our Q&A. Thank you, Monique. So obviously we're talking about hemp here, and when we think about that, especially on the analytical side of things, Kevin, can you speak to some about what the status is now?
Yeah, as any fledgling industry, we find ourselves with a lack of standardization, one of the biggest problems. So you go from place to place, program to program, and you find unique rules, unique requirements of the clients. And so it makes both getting into it really hard and really hard to follow all the rules. Quite confusing sometimes, in fact, when one client may be speaking one language and another client speaks an entirely different language, rule-wise.
Yeah.
Another big thing we find is there's a lack of international standards. So without any kind of big overarching rules, guidelines, each group's left to their own accord, and we find some unique idiosyncrasies there with those rules and how they go about applying them.
So this whole lack of standardization, within a state, within the U.S., international, what effects do you see that this causes across the industry, if any, or a lot?
The first one right off the bat is varying sample results for the same sample even. A client will bring us samples, we'll run them, present data back, and then someone else, they'll tell us another laboratory got, X result, Y result for the same sample. Without that standardization, that kind of all on the same page, same playbook, it's really hard to try and troubleshoot both, was it an operator error? Was it, a laboratory error? Where do we find these varying results when in fact, often is in fact the same plant they give us? So we know for a fact that we at least have a pretty good idea of the chain of custody, so we can kind of trace some things back, but it just creates such variation. And that variation has led to a loss of trust. A lot of end users or clients really don't trust the data that comes from laboratories. So many people use the laboratory as a barrier to sell the product. By that, I mean they have to get the lab report, and as soon as they get that passing, that's good enough for them, regardless of how it truly applies or what the real data is of the samples they provided, which can also, put them in a real unique legal bind here shortly. If they get tested and they found they're out of compliance and we claim they are in compliance, that's a pretty big pickle to find themselves in. and just literally an overall inability to help the industry. Most analytics and testing helps the client at the end of the day, better quality, better product, whatever it is. We find now that we're just really not meeting that need as you would see in other industries.
I see. So we think about that. Hemp testing, sense of reliability by the client, who's testing it, as well as another client that is the customer of your client. So I hear quite a bit, especially when we talk with our state and a number of other states, and also the feds themselves. So which lab is right? So it seems that there's one lab will come out with something, the next one comes up with something else, and you've got fingers pointed in different directions. So what's going to take to get to where lab to lab is going to be understood? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, there's a few ways to accomplish making the testing more reliable or consistent. One of the easiest ways, which we probably won't end up getting, would be a simple single standard that's applied across the board. EPA did that in the 90s with some of the environmental work they were doing. That's a great example where they just said, this is the method, everyone uses it. If you wish to work for this, everybody does it. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to be the case with us. There's so many different groups now, and some pretty entwined people now have already kind of figured out where their company is and where their business model is. So it's kind of hard to move some big mountains. So what I foresee the future being more is a set of standards that are pretty well defined, pretty much like the food testing across the international waters and such. The standards are very well defined. Of course, they change every year, but with such written down and structured procedures, you can go to one lab and get a test and go to another lab, and you're going to be getting really very similar results across the board, even if the sample isn't that similar, because they've solved many of those hard problems of sampling, matrix effect of the product itself, just all the really big concerns.
So you mentioned matrix effects. So what do you mean by that, and how would that influence lab to lab variability?
Matrix effect is really interesting. You're looking for one compound, in this case usually CBD in the hemp is what's so common, or CBDA. But we find that when you extract it or whenever you start messing with it, you're bringing hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of other compounds involved. Many of the oils create issues for the testing. Especially on the instrument. They create long-term buildup on the instrument. Special preparations are needed depending on what you're using. And that's assuming you just are staying on the straight flower. You start talking oil extracts, some of the other stuff where you've increased the wax contents, and some of the other really hard to quantify and separate compounds. You can definitely see different results across the board. And unfortunately, cannabinoids tend to like to react with those other compounds and be bound up, and so you won't get the same result across the board time after time. Yeah.
So, right. So binding up, is that like with some lipid or some other functional group in the matrix, if you will? If we look at different products that are on shelves around the U.S., we see reports now where somebody says, I'm not getting the same amount of CBD that's supposed to be in here, and then you have others where you have more, and they seem to be substantial in some cases. Does this tie back to the laboratory in any way, or are we looking at really manufacturing practices?
Either one right now, or both actually. In many cases, with it being such a new industry, many of the manufacturing practices aren't well hammered out. If you look at the chemical industry and other industries that are a little similar, you find that they have in-house analytics, in-house R&D. Very rarely do you see that now, and if you do, are they duplicating the same method the laboratory is going to run? And then also you find a lot of new laboratories that are tending to pop up, or moving over to this matrix, and without a good experience and understanding of what uniqueness this industry has, the matrix effects like we were talking about, and things like that, oil, wax buildups. Long-term maintenance that the instruments need, how long can the columns last. There's a lot of other things that come into it, and they can really change the results very quickly. And the analyst may or may not even be aware of this. Some of them are very subtle, and it's really hard to tell when and not, and when they are affecting your results.
So if we look at somebody coming up with a certificate of analysis, the lingo is a COA, HEMI or COA. We need a COA to carry something from one place to the other. We see in some cases where one can look at a QR code on somebody's box on a shelf, and you can scan that, and it comes back with a description of that, and maybe the batch itself may have a COA on that. Do you recommend that this practice be available for all customers, some customers, some products? What are your thoughts on that?
We are absolutely in favor of all forms of data being released to the clients, for as long as it doesn't violate trade secrets and such like that. We have such new clients out there, and by that I mean end users, that the more information we can provide for them, the more we can educate them, the better it'll be for the industry as a whole, especially for manufacturers and producers. The more they can tell what separates them, how they guarantee quality to the client, those can only help you in the long run and only help your business practices. Not to mention, when you start getting that kind of real data back from your laboratory, you can improve formulations considerably. And the biggest thing, you can build quality. You're getting the correct product on the shelf every time. And that usually helps build clients at the end of the day. And just the general transparency helps to bring more validity to the industry. We are, again, a new industry, of course, with the cannabis being so related to us and so close, helping to distinguish us some, and to show that we are trying to provide data to all the clients and trying to teach people will only make us more and more of a legitimate industry.
Got it. So do you see, in terms of, providing that information, or do you know of locations, websites, industry sites that are particularly positive, or maybe model or aspirational for folks to look at in terms of how they report their various forms of cannabinoids and other chemical constituents of their extracted and then, of course, dry and other products like that?
To me, the chemical industry does a great job, pharmaceutics, in that. If you really dig down deep, you can find that they're doing a very good job of providing data from one client, one company to another entity. If we can model it more after that, I believe we'd have much better results going forward. They've created the C of A, so to speak. That's their lingo. They hand them out with every batch that they ship out. The only thing that might be a little bit different is where it applies to the end user and how much their final consumption would be. But for the most part, I believe that's, no reason to reinvent the wheel. Just follow some of the models that have already been hammered out for thousands and thousands of compounds and just add our few onto that.
Got it. So if we think about that, a thought that comes to my mind is like shelf life, right? So something's been sitting on the shelf, and do you think, it seems to me, the analytical side of the industry would be key in, quantitating that, right? And also marking that. It's just, do you have thoughts on that? Like, how stable do you think CBD is in a matrix that, as it's delivered?
Yeah, that can vary a ton, and a lot of that information is just now being generated. A lot of it turns out to be proprietary, though. The company's paying for it or holding on to it very closely for obvious reasons. But any stability study like that, again, jumping back to the pharmaceutics, you'd be required to do all kinds of that testing, stability studies for each and every product, many lots that you made, and in pharmaceutics, all lots you made. Just so you have that information provided. That's probably overkill for our industry, but at least having some kind of benchmark of what occurs when. And, especially for people who create their own formulations, you really should have that information on there. But some people are having trouble even getting the correct amount into the bottle itself now, the final product. And so that is a great dream, and I hope we get there in a short period of time, but it might be a little bit off still.
Got it. So if we look at, a laboratory setup, you've set up new labs when the industry is really new, relatively speaking. And now as we look at forward, if you look back at your former, earlier, younger self, what would you advise Kevin as to think about this or think about that? Do you have any advice?
I worked in in pharmaceutics and research and development. I surprisingly would tell myself to document more things. I thought I was doing an adequate job documenting, research binder after research binder. But if I could go back and do it again, I would document even more. It's amazing how many new things were being discovered, especially in the 2013, 2014 about this matrix. Granted, it was very similar matrix, but it turns out to be so similar from the analytics side that you can take most of that information straight across. I would definitely reach out more to the clients too. I found talking and communication to the clients is key, important for a laboratory or for a manufacturer as well. But getting that immediate feedback, it's just immensely useful, and you can change on the fly, improve your work. That would be the two key components I would tell my younger self.
Mm-hmm. And then, so that's kind of an analog to looking in someone's lab today. Somebody's just started up. Somebody's been there for a while. When you walk into a lab, I know when I walk into a lab of a colleague or something like that, I can look around and pretty well get an idea of what's important to them and what are they looking at and what sort of analyses they're running. And they don't have to tell me. You can just see the equipment, or you can see the state of things, right? And you can just kind of look at the stale date on somebody's just simple hydrochloric acid or something like that, and you kind of look at it and go, wow, that's like 15 years old. So so what do you look at? What kind of questions come to your mind when you go into someone's lab?
Well, like you said, I pay attention if I am on a physical tour. Like you said, looking at any kind of workload. Do they clean? Is their equipment cleanliness? What's the age of their equipment? And then also to look at their employees. Is their workspace clean? Do they clean it off? And that's so important in analytics, because any cross-contamination can really ruin your values, especially, when we're doing high-value CBD and then right next to it a very low-value CBD. Besides the carryover on the instrument, just the cleanliness of the glassware. Can you trust their samples? Are they using disposable containers to make sure there is no cross-contamination, even during sample collection? And what's the organization? Because, throughout the entire process, your samples will be taken out, broken down, analyzed, transferred containers, often multiple times. Are they keeping good records? Do we know that they may have started your sample in that vial, but did they end the sample in the same vial? Mm-hmm. And it sounds so simple, but it makes all the difference in the world. I often then, if I'm asking questions, I'll ask questions about the experience of their technical staff. Who's there, what background do they have? Training, experience. Do you know that you can trust that they know what they're doing? And I often then look at the history of the company too. How long have they been in the industry? Have they run thousands and thousands of tests? Do people trust them? Are they a known name? Or are they brand new to the industry and just starting out? Which isn't to knock it, but just something to look at. Then I would ask different questions if they're new to the industry. Again, what would their technical staff be? Did they get someone from another laboratory who understands the matrix effects? Have they studied up on that? Have they done proficiency tests too? That's the big one. Can they prove they can get the right result as everybody else in the group? And then what accreditation have they sought? Are they looking for accreditation? Often that goes with your proficiency test, but that kind of tells me what rules they're operating under. And as we know, all accreditation can vary a lot. ISO is not as much as some of the others. So they may be following all the rules, but they may not be meeting all your personal needs for your company. And that's something very big to try and figure out really quickly. Because if they can't meet your needs, then, you might need to move on or have a real conversation on how they can improve their skills towards meeting your needs. Detection limits are real big too. We're talking THC, which can be a legality issue. Do they have the good detection limits? If they're giving you 0.4, 0.5, that's a little rough. You need to be somewhere a little bit lower to know once you start mixing, concentrating, are you going to still be okay, or are you going to run afoul? And then those are the high points I usually ask. And then, like I've said before, just keep my eye out and listen and communicate with them and ask as many questions as I can get answers to.
Yeah, so there, by your example, those would be good questions that anybody who's considering a lab would ask, right? And that's kind of the hidden part of my question was somebody's new, or you're looking for another laboratory to work with. You're just new to all of this. These are really good questions to ask. When I think about, the questions, what role do you think standards and the standard sources are? So is that a question you'd want to ask a laboratory that you're working with, or is that not so much your questions of just how good of analysis and how well you're able to develop a standard curve and to look at your internal standards, right?
Oh yeah, standards are one of the most important. It's very important that they're buying from a reputable source. They can be, making their own as long as they're verifying them. Many companies do make their own right now. It's becoming more and more popular. But just make sure everybody is saying the same lingo. Luckily, the proficiency test will take a lot of that into account, but depending on how big the window is, it can kind of, be good, but not be nearly good enough, especially for our low levels. During the extraction process, you often do a huge dilution, and then that just multiplies your error by that same dilution factor. And that can become really important when you're talking trace levels, 0.1% or something. And depending on if the laboratory is doing multiple dilutions, and like you said, keeping the compounds within their calibration curve. And then then that leads right to the calibration curve. How good is it? Do they do R-squared values? Do they tell you what those are? And we have found that there is quite a variation of the standards on the market right now. And, I've seen over 10% variation from standard to standard provider. When I reference everything against that, and then I multiply it by a huge dilution, you can have pretty big variations real quickly.
Yeah, I can throw you. So I got one more question for you, and I think that will be our time for this part of the presentation, and that is, do you have any advice you would give to growers, those who are working on the extracting side, and then, of course, any manufacturers, processors downstream that would kind of give in terms of building a good relationship with the laboratory. So what are your key sort of points on that?
First thing I could tell them is find someone that'll make time for you. Find if they'll answer your questions. Will they try and custom tailor some work for you, or at least, find out if you're even asking the correct questions. Often, they're the experts, so they should be the ones telling you information on how to sample, providing kind of some structure to you. If they won't even take the time to talk to you or won't give you enough attention that you feel like you deserve, it's a little hard to think they'll give your sample more. If they see you as a number, then you might get treated as such. If you are an entity and they want to help solve your problems, then you can really go places with them. You can really get good quality from them. I would also tell them to work with their sample collectors. Those are your best friends there are. They're your point of contact often, but on top of that, they're also the person that's going to pull the sample. If that sample isn't pulled correctly and gotten to the laboratory, all that good back-end work that the lab may do, they could be the best in the world, but if they don't get a good sample, it's all for naught.
Right.
And I would always tell them, ask before you test. If you're going to send in a bunch of samples to the laboratory, just send them a quick email or phone call. Often many problems can be put down long before they arise if you just ask before you test. You know, if you're going to do a big R&D run and you're going to spend thousands of dollars, you talk to the lab first. They can often give you, you know, steer you in the right direction, give you great information. And then I guess that leads to the last one, which is always ask them questions. You know, if in doubt, ask them. Send a quick email, because it's amazing how much some of the technical experts know and how they can point you in the right direction really quickly.
All right, so there we are with our first two presentations this morning. We're about to go into a break. We're going to hold, I don't see any questions in the chat right now, so sorry about that, Kevin. We'll pick up with that when we go into that at the 11:40 time mark. So we now have a break, so by all means, be sure to be back here at 25 after the hour, so we got 15 minutes, and I'll pick up and rejoin this conference. So watch the posters.
So cute.
Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and restart second half of today's session 5, the session on processing, testing, post-harvest considerations. A couple of bits of housekeeping here. First is that should we have somebody Zoom bomb our conference, we will try to move them off as quick as possible. And do know that if we're unsuccessful, we're just going to stop. And we ask that you come back on about 5 minutes, within 5 minutes after we turn down the conference. We'll restart it. So we do want to keep this going. Another bit is that we do have a survey out. Please fill that out because next week we have our focus groups and they're really important for that. They're going to give us an idea as to what we want to pay attention to and prioritize for that session. So again, that's next week, and that will wrap up our conference. So without further ado, we want to move on to the second of the 3 sort of market types, if you will, gross market types for hemp. That is essential oil hemp. And we're going to be talking with Jacob Crabtree, who has a presentation. Jacob is CEO of Columbia Hemp Trading Company, one of Oregon's largest hemp processors. Now entering its 3rd season, CHTC has dried and processed thousands of acres of hemp for Oregon farmers, helping them bring their products to market, such as CBD. So since its founding, Crabtree and company as partners have worked to define a supply chain of expanding hemp industry as the number of growers in Oregon continues to increase. He has extensive experience in the overall cannabis sativa industry. And so without further ado, we're going to listen to his presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Crabtree I am the CEO of Columbia Hemp Trading Company. Columbia Hemp was founded in 2018 with the initial purpose of creating the first physical marketplace in the hemp industry. Since then, we have added many components along the supply chain, but first started with our drying operations to support our local farmers, where we saw the immediate need here in the Pacific Northwest.
What sectors do you participate in?
We participate in agronomy, drying, primary extraction, refinement, bulk formulations, along with co-packing and nutraceuticals. However, for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to focus on drying and primary extraction and how each of those sectors impact the rest of our supply chain.
What are the key advantages and disadvantages of your sectors?
So starting with drying, the advantages of drying, a term we often use here is kind of top of the funnel. So for us, we look at this as an aggregating tool. First of all, it's a critical step in the supply chain and results in a lot of product being pointed in your direction if you're a service provider in the drying sector. This advantage obviously gives us a lot of optionality on how to deal with that product, whether we decide to just return it back to the farmer, or if we like it and it's desirable, bring it further downstream to create a value add with that product. Obviously, drying can be done a lot of different ways, whether it's a large scale farm onboarding their own drying systems, or a small scale farm doing it through hang drying. But here in the Pacific Northwest, we really can't rely on the weather. So finding a good service provider or making sure you have these operations well handled in your drying lands or in your farming landscape is hugely important. One of the downsides to being at the top of the funnel is the quality often falls on our shoulders. Looking back over the past few years, we've had the luxury of dealing with about 30 different farmers in the Pacific Northwest. Each of these are utilizing different genetics and different harvesting techniques, resulting in a different looking crop coming to our doors. So we have that kind of downside of having the expectation of a very consistent looking crop coming out of our facility with a very variety of inputs. So that's a difficult task to manage. But we're trying to do what we can to really standardize the process as it comes to our gates. The other disadvantage of being at the top of the funnel is the harvest season in the Northwest is all but 2 months. So getting all that product handled, quality maintained in a 2-month span, sometimes less if we have a rainy season, it is quite difficult when we're talking about managing about 10 million wet pounds into our facility during that time. Next, we look at rapid innovation. A huge advantage here in the drying sector is that new technology is readily available. Many people have looked at the drying aspect for other agricultural products for years and years and years, and we have the luxury of working with these professionals to try and glean some of the information and learnings they've had from, let's say, the hops industry and translate those into the hemp industry. And as you can see with these 3 pictures here, over the first 3 years of our existence, we've gone from a really batch style manual process, a really low and slow drying thought, into our second year, which was high volume, rapid drying, a process that takes about 60 seconds, but allowed us to do millions and millions of pounds over the season, into now our third year, which is actually scaling it back a little bit, really looking at product quality here, but also having continual throughput. It's important to understand that with a major price drop in the industry, upwards of 90% in both the biomass and oil sectors, the price that worked for farmers for drying in 2018 no longer is there in 2020, in 2019 and 2020. We've had to really look at how do we cut 90% of our costs or service costs out to provide the farmer with a fee that makes sense and is within their budget. So that's a major downside to this, to the rapid innovation sector, is really we're not seeing the technology advance as quick as the market is contracting. But we're making it through here. Next is really our location. Being here located in the Willamette Valley in the Pacific Northwest, we again have the luxury of working with a lot of experienced farmers who have worked with specialty crops for years and years and years. They're bringing their expertise now into the hemp industry and can also bring a lot of different technology around harvesting. So we're seeing, again, a lot of rapid innovation there and a lot of knowledge brought into it. We have great growing conditions here in the Northwest, so long as the weather holds up in early fall, that produce some of the highest yielding crops anywhere in the world. And we also have a great legal landscape, which was really brought on by our local legislators, inviting farmers, inviting operators to the table to really craft laws that make sense for everybody. Now, while there's not a lot of disadvantages for being in Oregon, one of the big glaring issues that we deal with is that we only have a single crop. Because of this, we're really picking the technology that we hope will work for the next year. We're placing our bets on what farmers will be doing coming out of the field, but we only have one testing period each year in the fall, September, October, and November, or mid-November, in order to get it right and make tweaks on the fly. If we were somewhere, let's say in Hawaii, where we have multiple harvest seasons per year, we could really look to make incremental changes to our technology, not place all of our bets and all of our money on one single advancement, and just see how those worked out over the course of a year, and bring that information back to places like Oregon to really have major advancements year over year with both drying, extraction, and harvesting techniques. The other part of only having one harvest season per year is just the bottleneck it creates with drying and extraction. We have, again, 30, 40 farmers coming to our gates with, thousands and thousands of acres that need to be dried in a short period of time. And if we're getting rain in early fall, we may be dealing with 20, 30 trucks every single day bringing biomass that has to be taken care of immediately. So that can be quite challenging to deal with. Now moving to extraction, or really primary extraction, which is the process of taking the biomass into a fully winterized decarbed oil. The major advantage here that we see is, again, it's a required step in the process. If you're a farmer or an operator that doesn't want to sell it at the biomass stage, transforming that into an oil product is absolutely required. But that has additional advantages for us, right? So it's a good place to really hold on to some profits when you're looking at the finished cost of a liter of oil, whether it be crude oil, distillate, or what have you. Really 80 to 90% of that cost is baked into this initial primary extraction stage. And that's whether it's done with ethanol, CO2, or heptane or the like. Because of this, even as the market's contracted and as we go forward, we will be able to maintain and hold a profit here. And it's also a good place if you're a broker to look towards for arbitrage, because we can play off different markets by increasing the price and turning the product over. Some of the challenges with this large transformation step that we deal with is really undefined quality standards. So being in a bit of a nascent industry, most of our customers are starting to understand what they don't want in the product, things like fats and waxes, non-distillable impurities, but they're not really giving us a target to shoot for. I do believe this will come in the form of working further downstream with product developers who, when they get customer feedback, will be able to revert that information back to extractors like ourselves to really help hone in exactly what we're looking for in that product and give us a target to shoot for in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. One of the downsides again here in this large transformation step is it creates a bottleneck for waste material. One of our missions here is to create a sustainable supply chain from agronomy all the way to finished products. And post-extracted material accumulates very quickly, on the order of 5,000 pounds a day. And the last place we want to see this end up is in the landfill. So finding outlets for this is often tricky. We're either working with pilot programs that only need a few thousand pounds here or there, or people running massive operations that need a scale or a volume of material that we will really never achieve. We are working with some current projects right now that look at utilizing post-extracted pelletized material as a feed grain. Those are just really in the trial phases right now. So again, they're not requiring a ton of product, but I'm hopeful that these will take off here soon. What we need to assist there, though, is really an aggregation method, something that's bringing multiple processors together to pile the material and create a unified or streamlined area of where it's going. Another advantage to this primary extraction stage here, or sector, is really a barrier to entry. You're looking at large equipment that has long lead times. So it takes a long time for a lab to establish itself. It takes even longer for that lab to start understanding what a quality product looks like and means. So they have a long time from the day they decide to enter to when they're up and running, and can be really competitive in the space. Additionally, you're going to have a difficult pathway to compliance. It's my belief that in order to play in this sector, or really in the hemp industry in the future, you're going to need to have all your certifications well documented and well completed. That's going to include, USDA organic and really CGMP as a baseline. Those can be long lead items, upwards of 6 to 9 months, and especially with the current climate around COVID, it may take even longer to get those certifications in place. So there's a large barrier to entry that people really need to consider before entering this sector, which, if you're already operating and up and running in here, it does provide an advantage for you. The downside, though, is because of those long lead times, once you're in it, you're really looking, you've really placed your bet on the technology. We about a year ago were actually looking at a technology that was going to produce or extract 40,000 pounds per day. And I look back and reflect on how that would have impacted our company and our business by being stuck with such equipment and really not even being able to turn it on in today's marketplace. So you really have to think long and hard about which technology you're going to choose, what that lead time is to get it up and running, and make sure that it's something that is not going to be antiquated in a few months as the market changes and prices continue to drop. Another barrier here is, or another disadvantage with this barrier to entry is, if you're brand new to the space and you're looking for an out-of-the-box solution, it's often not going to work as you're expecting it to. You really need qualified professionals, people with industry experience, looking at the technology and making sure it's going to fit for your operations and produce the desired outcomes you're looking for. We've seen time and time again of people really putting lots of capital expenses into huge extraction devices, only to be really halted by modification after modification and permitting issues, and really months and months before they're actually producing a product that's viable in the marketplace. So again, just as a summary, really think long and hard here on your equipment selection before you get up and running.
What are some of the key research needs in this sector?
Yeah, so starting with drying, one of the key needs that we have, and this has been in the works for some time, but it's really standardization around the cultivation and harvesting techniques. What we've seen over the last 2 years is a lot of silage chopping going on. We're getting the whole plant coming into our facility, and we're having to dry all of it at once. Obviously, we're having to charge the farmer for this, which is increasing costs by upwards of 40%. And it creates a bit of a sticky situation for us, having to dry the stock material and the flower, which dry at very different rates. So the sooner we can achieve a consensus here, while maximizing pounds per acre, but really honing in on a cultivation technique that works with some of the new harvesting methods that are coming out that are really stripper headers or kind of bean strippers that people are using that really just bring us pure flower, the sooner we can achieve efficiency in these first 2 sectors, being drying and extraction. So I'm hopeful this year that we're going to see a lot of these changes being implemented, so that we can really share that efficiency back with our farmer and lower their drying costs. Another big research need for us is around emissions. As we've entered new cities, one of the first things that comes up is odor and emissions. Being that hemp is a new industry, it's unknown to a lot of people of whether we're drying hemp or marijuana and whether that's going to cause adverse health effects. We need some support from researchers to really help us validate what we believe is a process that's not doing major environmental damage or causing adverse human health effects. And right now, as we're working with local municipalities on permitting issues, there's really nowhere for us to turn to look at and point towards, hey, here's some validation that what we're doing is really just evaporating water and really creating minimal emissions. So the more support there would really help us as well as other dryers in the industry. And in general, where we could use some support is a fair trade type program. Obviously, developing a full fair trade program will take some time, but we need some support from economists to help understand what each stage in the supply chain should cost and where your profits should be at if you're running an efficient operation. It would do wonders for us and others in the industry to be able to look out 4 or 5 years, understand where the market will land, where it will stabilize, and how we should be tooling our equipment and technology in order to achieve those efficiencies and those pricing. Most of us today are living in the dark here, and we see a lot of people participating in liquidation pricing and selling with really little support or research to point towards of where they should be pricing their material. And another big one here is byproducts. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but creating a system of aggregation amongst a lot of processors and even dryers who may end up, like ourselves, with low potency biomass is creating channels and outlets for these byproducts. I think many of us in the industry are looking to create sustainable pathways. So not only creating those products that can utilize, extracted material or low potency biomass, but creating the networks between each processor to have maybe a state by state, location where this is all being aggregated would be a huge support for us. Again, the last thing we want to see here is material ending up in a landfill or waste area. And lastly here is the characteristics we are looking for with the cannabis plant that'll help streamline our operation. So what we want as far as optimization, this goes back to harvesting methods coming out of the field. as we want kind of short, squatty plants, minimal fiber as we can get, so that we can easily mechanically harvest and strip the plants. What we're seeing this year is higher plant density to really help kind of limit the growth of the plants. But anything we can do with the morphology to keep that plant as contained as possible and produce really just pure flower coming into our drying facilities would be hugely helpful. Obviously, we want to maximize CBD content up to the upward threshold that we're not crossing over the THC barrier, but a combination between these two would be hugely helpful. And then on the extraction side, one of the biggest challenges we face each and every day is dealing with the fats and waxes that come when extracting this material. So really developing a plant that limits fat and wax content will really help us tool our equipment and create efficiencies both along extraction and refinement and downstream. Now, there are a lot of places where they want those fats and waxes, and I don't believe we'll ever be able to completely remove them. But finding efficiencies there will greatly reduce our marginal cost of production and streamline the entire process for us. So that's about all I have here for the presentation today, and I look forward to everyone's questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jacob. We're looking at a question. I have one question. I'm going to hold that for later so we can move on and stay on schedule. And so our next presentation is by Bill Sear on the on the hemp product formulations, things that one needs to be aware of, especially when you think of these initial sets like FSMA, HACCP, CGMP, etc., as one moves from the field to fork, so to speak. And Bill Sear has decades of experience in food products and food ingredients manufacturing, sales, marketing, distribution, North America and Europe. Since 2016 has been a registered hemp handler in the state of Oregon, working on manufacturing hemp-based packaged products. He's also a board chairman and founding member of the Association of Western Hemp Professionals. So with that introduction, let's hear what Bill and I had to say.
And thank you for the invitation. I come to the industry with years of experience in actually creating an infrastructure in manufacturing for safe food manufacturing that's compliant at all levels of manufacturing, meaning supplier compliance to the same programs. This food safety overview is really a farm to fork or table overview of food safety throughout the, total supply chain within the hemp industry. So farmers to extractors, extractor to product makers through distribution and the final customer. So food safety is integrated throughout the whole supply chain in our normal food manufacturing platform. And my premise has been we can, with an initiative and determination as a company to provide safe, reliable products to consumers, all the intricate pieces of this program are already available to us and functioning in the food industry. And my premise has been, let's self-regulate. And of course, There are some decisions waiting to be made at USDA level and FDA level, but as an industry, we can be proactive and step up to the plate and make sure our segment and our piece is done properly from a food safety standpoint. And our suppliers in the industry too ought to be taken to task to provide us with safe food ingredients or their component as it travels through the hemp supply chain, manufacturing supply chain to us. Being a product maker, I view myself as being at the end of the supply chain. So that means basically our extractors need to be compliant. Food safety need to follow the same practices, develop the same programs, and even backing up, to the farmer. They have certain requirements they need to meet, and then actually genetics also. So it's really, as I see this and as I view it, this is a very start, finish, and farm to table or fork program that needs cooperation at all levels. Moving on from there, I'm going to move on to really what are the goals that we want to attain, and how do we control and prevent contamination? And here I referred to hemp as CBD, but as we know, hemp is much greater than CBD. There's hemp seeds, which are hulled. There's hemp seeds that are processed into oil and hemp meal. And fortunately today, the seeds do have a GRAS status, which means they can forego a lot of further validation as a food product or food ingredient due to the historical use of the product over time, or the ingredients. So because they are really ingredients, hulls can be eaten, but they can also be used as ingredient. Same with hemp seed oil would be an ingredient, and hemp meal, certainly ingredient and additive. So that segment of our industry does have the status of GRAS, which means they can more quickly go to the market in a fashion that is compliant at the FDA level, yet they still can't go to market properly and forego what we're going to talk about today. So the rest of the food or the rest of the hemp industry and segments of manufacturing do not have the GRAS status. That is mainly due to the historical data and bringing forth information that would allow the FDA to grant us GRAS status. Hasn't happened, about documentation and proof of use. So as we go forward, as we talk about plant material that's been harvested, going to extraction, and then within extraction, you have crude oil, you have distillates, isolates, and further processed products within those categories. So they are all subjected to no different than in the food world, where you take soybeans and process the beans into oil, into meal, or into functional shortenings and oils and so forth that are used as ingredients or fat systems for frying and so forth. So our industry is parallel in that regard, where the extracts and distillates or isolates become food ingredients. And So beyond that, in my world, is we use those hemp food ingredients as part of our products. And so we're reliant on the extractors. The extractors are reliant on the actual hemp growers to provide and support safe food supply chain in our industry. So these safety controls and means to prevent contamination aren't in existence. They do exist in the general food industry, manufacturing, supply chain. So my premise has been and always been, let's pick from the food industry the basics of a structured program, then to validate our different manufacturing segments in the hemp industry, then to step up, be responsible, and do the right thing for the industry. And today, we are waiting for decisions to be made at the federal level with FDA. We have been waiting for decisions, yet our responsibility, being part of the industry, is to, in my opinion, step up, be responsible, and build out a safe program in our segments. And if you happen to be vertically integrated, then then start at the field, start at the farm, and develop the program through your vertical integration. So, hey, that's really what I want to talk about, and is pulling from the food industry what we know already exists and works and has been developed actually with a commitment from the food industry to self-regulate. So that in itself makes FDA's job easier, makes USDA's job easier. It's cooperation. So I'll just move along in the presentation and speak a little bit about what we do, what can be done, what's in existence in the food industry to help us with these controls and preventative measures that we can adapt to our segment, or if we are vertical, to our whole business model. So these basically food contaminants are broken down by physical contaminants, chemical, or biological. And this is basically the starting point of identifying contaminants, how you can segment them, and how you can then begin the process of identifying and eliminating these potential food contaminants, and what's already established in the food industry as a means to help you identifying potential contaminants in these three areas. So in any company, say for instance, if you're a primary extractor and you bring plant material in, or biomass as we call it, into your facility, your foundation program, or the beginning point for you as a company in building out these safety programs or measures in your company, what we call the foundation. And this is strictly what it does is it forces you to understand your business. The foundation has to do with everything about your business, and it's pre-HACCP or pre-CGMP development, but parts of it do roll right into your final actual in-house preventative controls and programs in CGMP. So these foundation programs would be centered around just your daily operation. Would be start when raw materials are delivered. So you have basic procedures that you can implement that allow you then to have the information necessary to back up. And when there's ever a question about your finished product, your foundation program gives you the ability then to trace and with documentation of the ingredients that come in. Everything is dated and coded properly, used as an ingredient and goes into storage for later use, and everything is rotated properly. So you have a whole series of events that need to happen, or as your foundation program, from internal sanitation, eroding control, to, like I mentioned, inspection of raw materials, inspection of packaging. You know, you think that it's, oh, it's just packaging that's coming in. It's not unusual to receive a pallet or pallet loads of bottles that somehow in transportation, little fragments of glass have been rubbed off and distributed through that pallet or two of packaging material. So it's the procedure of dating everything, visual inspections becomes very important as part of your foundation, as well as your internal sanitation, cleaning programs, equipment operation, and certain equipment. There are certain aspects of it that require extra care and need to be noted for your equipment operator and for cleaning purposes. And so it's a general, this prerequisite approach in the foundation really gets you in tune with all facets of your manufacturing, from raw materials coming in to visual inspections and a level of comfort that everything is in place from receiving all the way through manufacturing and packaging. So thank you. This foundation is actually not part of your HACCP program, and some of you may wonder, what is HACCP? HACCP's a program that's used throughout the food manufacturing. It's used in pharmaceutical, and it a history going back almost 100 years in the U.S. and internationally as being, it represents hazard analysis in critical control points. So the HACCP program drills down from the foundation, and some parts of the foundation program flow and are needed or used in HACCP program. So items covered, we've talked about in general some of the items recorded in this prerequisite foundation program. They're not actual control points, but some do evolve into being part of your HACCP program. And prerequisite programs states can be used as preventative controls, and preventative controls are really the foundation of your HACCP program also. Thank you. So moving on beyond HACCP, you also internally, a company can create and document their CGMPs. So current good manufacturing practices, in the past they were always just GMPs, but now the FDA is updated, requiring the industry to make sure that their GMPs are current. So that's where the C comes into place. A lot of GMPs historically have just been rolled forward and not updated. When you're talking about HACCP and CGMPs, it's a living, breathing program within your company, within your manufacturing company, and updates. It's a program that you live with daily. So I call it the living, breathing food safety program within your company, with documentation through logs, and all of this gets disseminated. You know, it's a top-down program, so management pushes the program down in the organization into your different functional groups of the company, into your manufacturing group, into your receiving and shipping areas, into your sanitation department, and even R&D has responsibility as they develop and create product formulas. Then they need to vet the manufacturers. So in this case, the difficulty so far in the hemp industry is when you're in one segment of the industry, say packaged products, and I'm continually vetting our suppliers, and our suppliers would be the extractors. In some case, our supplier would be directly from the farm. And so farm segment is a USDA area of control, and I know pretty much what has to happen. And this last slide is really what has to happen. It's a commitment for self-regulation. It starts at the training level, and with training, then you will have a person within your organization as the trainer for your company and building out your prerequisite program, your HACCP program, and your GMP, CGMP program. So self-regulation is, in my opinion, what we need to do. And it's a commitment. And we all have a lot invested, time, money, emotions in this business. So let's step up and start the self-regulation. Anyways, self-regulation is nothing but a choice. So join me. We're offering a course in the Northwest through our organization, industry organization, for companies that are interested in stepping up and self-regulating. Happy to share this information, whoever is interested. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Thanks, Bill. So we have a few minutes here for questions. Let's see what's on our chat. And I'm not seeing any questions. Bill, is there anything in that presentation that you'd want to bring up at this point? I think in some ways, many people, especially in the cannabinoid industry, is looking at what the FDA is going to say. Do you have some idea that you might portend from that document? We know it's at the at OMB, and we're just awaiting the outcome of that document. What do you think?
Well, my fear all along is, as an industry, if we don't start the process of self-regulation according to guidelines issued by the FDA that are already in existence, then I think the bar may be raised a bit higher than it needs to be. and put extra expense and strain on the industry, and companies will have great difficulty in being compliant. So, you know, we can set the bar based on FDA and guidance that exists today. Set the bar at a reasonable level where we can, as an industry, start to participate and support each other in the supply chain. Thank you.
Yeah, got it. So, you know, the FDA last week did put out its guidelines for industry if they're going to be looking at cannabinoids and related compounds going into the pharmaceutical industry, right? So we know that that's kind of your Uber level. If you're looking at CGMP, HACCP, you have the next higher level, right, in terms of affirmed, safe, clean production and handling of compounds, because ultimately they're going into a therapeutic or a drug. And that seems the FDA said that needed to go out first before the CBD went out. Have you heard from industry lately, just people's perspectives on that draft document?
You know, no, I haven't. Nothing specific, other than seems like most of the industry is waiting to be told what to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a big flaw
Yeah.
in the whole thought process.
Yeah, I got that.
Yep.
So, all right. Thank you, Bill. We'll, if you can mute, so I'm going to go on and introduce our next and final presentation, conversation this morning. And that's with Greg Necco. He's Chief Hemp Connector at IND Hemp, a Montana industrial hemp oilseed and fiber company. IND Hemp is building the processing and agronomy infrastructure necessary to scale hemp seed, food, and hemp fiber production to meet domestic supply chain needs. IND Hemp is currently operating at pilot scale fiber processing line and is breaking ground this summer on dedicated hemp fiber processing plants. So with that, we'll hear our recorded conversation. Let's move on to hemp fiber. And we're going to be looking at processing, growing. We've already done earlier in this whole series of talks with the other faculty. So we're going to be looking at today for this section, we're meeting with Greg Necco. And Greg, what do you see as the key advantages and opportunities for hemp fiber production and processing?
Well, it's exciting, Jay, because right now I think America is ready for a domestic supply. There's a lot of excitement around hemp. We're already using hemp fibers. If you take a look here, we have a lot of products in the market in America and around the world right now that are made with fibers. Most of it's imported. So if you're looking at the hemp hurd constituents, you've got just hurd used for animal bedding, for hempcrete. We're using milled hurd in bioplastics, injection molding, and PLAs for 3D printing. The bast fiber is currently already being used for matting and insulations, hemp wool products, disposable wipes, and then a lot of exciting biocomposites in Europe and a lot of other places. They're making car door panels and other things, and that's something that we could do domestically here with the hemp supply. So we've got some things, that's what's in reach. And then I do want to touch on, kind of what's out of reach right now in the country is we don't really have an infrastructure for spinning and weaving and dyeing for making textiles. And the agricultural practices that true hemp fiber is using is different than what we've got on farm currently in the country. So learning those techniques if we're ever going to look at textiles, but that's pretty much out of reach at this point, we think.
Yeah, I agree. It's I've been looking over in China for a few years, working with them on their fiber genetics, fiber production, fiber processing. And it's really amazing looking at the infrastructure. And it really comes to my mind as kind of its chicken or egg. So which is first? And so what do you see as really the first step to domestic hemp fiber processing in the U.S.?
Well, in the West anyways, we've got a lot of grain hemp being grown, and we do see opportunity in using the grain stock. So hemp grain stock, for those that don't know, you harvest the seeded tops, and as you can see here, there's residue left in the field. And looking at the existing acreage and putting a facility in around that as a first step and getting an existing feedstock. Ooh.
Yeah. I agree. We grew a grain style hemp last year in different parts across Oregon, and we still have a bit that we kind of grow in the greenhouse just to look at. And I know when I've brought folks into like our greenhouse, I just pull up some of the dried grain stock, and I said, look at this, here's your bass fiber, here's your herd, and it's there. It just seems like wheat straw, which is going into paper products here in Oregon presently. Why not go, like you say? So I get that. And so obviously must be some benefit to that. I mean, it looks obvious, but how do you see it from the industrial side of using this as the egg or the chicken basically getting going?
Well, the way we're looking at it currently is really from the farmer perspective, supporting the grain farmers that are already growing hemp and scaling that production across the West, North Dakota, Montana, into Washington and Oregon, kind of the bigger states. And, there's a residue problem for the farmers. So as you're very aware, it's, the strongest fiber in the world, great for making products, really difficult for farmers to deal with. It's difficult to till into the soil. And a lot of people don't talk about it, but there's a lot of hemp that's burned off in Canada and other places that, we love to have this. Hemp is great and all these carbon benefits, but if we burn the carbon back into the atmosphere, then it's not doing, what it could be doing. So we're trying to solve the problem for the farmer and really create the opportunity for them to bale the hemp. And we also have to create the motivation, because it costs money for the farmer to go back in the field to run the tractor and to bale the hemp. And again, you say this chicken or the egg, we do have a feedstock of grain straw. We're kind of moving forward looking at that. We also need to figure out how to monetize that for the farmer so that it makes sense for their production.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's how do we get the monetized side of fiber? So you have it there, and moving forward. So part of that's probably needs. There's lots of questions, and usually, from a university standpoint, any researcher, even a federal or state researcher, like, what are the needs? What do you see, if any, that researchers could look at to help sort of nudge things in the direction that you and others are seeing on the fiber side?
Well, the primary thing for fiber, and this is industry and researchers, because I will say with fiber hemp, we probably know less than any other type of hemp production. I would say there's a lot of experts in cannabinoid hemp production right now in the country. There's been a few good seasons. There's some farmers that have had good opportunity to learn grain hemp, but both from the production and the processing side, fiber is fairly new in the country. There's been a few operations that have tried to get off the ground, but most of what we're learning is from folks like yourselves that are traveling internationally and learning in China and learning in Romania and these other countries. So like you said, chicken or the egg, we need to scale the processing. And there are some things happening around the country. You know, you hear a lot of whispers of this is happening, that's happening. You know, it's a big step for scaling that. But if we have the processing infrastructure set up and we start with these grain bales, now we can start expanding on the other genetics and the other things that we can learn more from that. Beyond that, we have the on-farm education and support. And that's really teaching current farmers new techniques for harvesting, if we are harvesting specifically for fiber, how that plays into retting techniques. That's probably one of the biggest areas that we need to learn, especially coming from a farmer focus of the current grain farmers. How can they deal with that straw that they currently have in the most effective manner, which is different than if you were harvesting specifically and retting fiber crop in China or somewhere else. And then also we need to learn the baling and the storage and the curing, and really the farmers have a lot to learn, and we as processors have a lot to work with them to learn in that. On the processing side, really having a technical understanding of what we're working with. And that's everything from incoming material and understanding the correlation between what did that farmer do with that straw in the field and what does that bale look like when you break it open and you start running it through first step decortication. We've been working with some bales from around Montana and different areas, and we have no idea what was done to the bales, but we're seeing extreme differences in the amount of dust or the amount of shatter or really how that stock does break up. So it's that combination of educating the farmers the different techniques and then correlating that with what's coming in and how we can learn from those materials, and then also what's coming out of the other side. You know, so primary decortication, for those that aren't aware, you're separating the bast and the hurd, and then you're going through scutching and carding and a number of things for cleaning that up. In the end, you end up with clean hurd and clean bast. Well, what is that material? And then what does it need to be used into something else? So learning to quantify those technical parameters of that material and start applying it into downstream businesses. And then the other big thing in fiber is the connections and the networking. And I think this is where university and research can play a great role, because you're in touch and other researchers are in touch with the industries that are looking at these materials. And they're coming to you and saying, how can we use these materials? What are we looking for in the specs? And on the same side, we have processors that are starting and they're working from the farm and working up to get into those raw materials. And we're learning how to quantify what is that and how can we make the connections that closes the circle, so to speak, and attaches the right industry to the right materials coming out of the right region.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Greg. And it kind of leads me to think, what are the next steps? I mean, you've listed some, but so there's research and such. Where's your next foot get planted, sort of on the ground, and anyone else that we're working with in this larger sort of enterprise within the U.S. and internationally? And I'm just thinking like breeders and innovators, industry buyers, right, in the market. Where do you see the next steps?
Yeah, so we'll look on the farm side first and expanding on what we were talking about there, but really honing in on the research needs is learning, and we're coming specifically from a point, again, of applying as a first step to current grain farmers and the current infrastructure that they have. It's very easy, I know, with everything hemp to go in multiple directions, especially fiber, but staying with our first steps of current crops in the ground and current implements on farm, how can we harvest, ret, and do baling and storing so that we can learn these next steps? So again, harvest, there's multiple ways to lay it down. It's really the retting is what's going to drive the harvest, right? And I would say the biggest area that we just don't know at this point, and I would say even at this point, we've got crops in the ground this year, and that if we can develop some methods for trials and be led to communicate with the farmers, are we going to leave it standing in the field? Are we going to lay it down in the field? Are you going to lay it down in the field a week or two after you cut it? Or are you going to lay it down in the field a month after you cut it? And these are all things that, frankly, we don't know. And we have a great opportunity. There's thousands of acres of hemp grain straw that will be in field this fall. And our hope in industry is that we can come up with some methods and actually truly test some methods in the regions where we are growing so that we are gaining those efficiencies going forward. And then another big thing, and a lot of people don't think about it, is once it's baled, how are we storing that? How are we curing that? I've heard from other presentations such as your own that, in China and other areas, they may not be processing that quickly or even within the same season. These are all things that we don't know. And bring it back to our current farmers, there's labor involved in all of this. And if we can't quantify monetizing it, it's hard to get the farmer to do the labor. There is the need to do something, but for a farmer, it's almost easier to just burn it off than it is to go around the tractor and windrow it and let it rest and then come back and bale it. And so I really think that a lot of the future for fiber will be driven by the research on the agronomy side and the best practices on farm on that side. And then for the processor, learning in detail what we're working with, like I mentioned before, evaluating those incoming materials, learning how to quantify those bales, and then developing the specs that industry does need downstream. You picture you break a stalk up, you get bast and hurd. I don't know if people can see, I've got bast and hurd. You've got these two bits, but what sizing do they need going into plastics? What sizing do you need going into matting? And what do we need to be doing on the processing side to developing the right equipment for that right output? You can spend millions of dollars and make a big mess and have something, piles of material that may not be the right material to go into industry. And once these materials do go into industry, it is a tight margin. It is a tight cost. We're competing against synthetic fibers, petrochemical fibers. That stuff is very cheap to make, and it's everywhere. And so, most industries, there is we call it the hemp tax. There's an upsell for using hemp products and using natural products. But really, to thrive in industry, there has to be a balance of input cost into products. And so we need to learn to do this efficiently. And that's both in the processing and the agronomy, so that we don't just make a big mess, spend a bunch of money, and end up with piles of dust that we can't use into anything. And then teaching us what are the next steps. The first step, separation. I think most of the plants that I've heard about that are coming online are primary decortication and separation. What are those next step processing, whether within the same facility or in another facility, that takes that material and further modifies it for those end uses?
Well said. Appreciate that. So Greg, one of the things I hear a lot is somebody says, I've ordered a decorticator. And it's like, so what? So what your product's going to be at the end. And I go, oh, no, I want to get it so I can get the fiber out. And it's, if we look at like the Chinese, European examples, you find your endpoint and you work backwards. And I hear, from your presentation, here's a resource from the grain straw. And so that's, and I think in, our conversations even before and what you've said this morning is you're looking at it from both ends, right? So it seems that there's so many questions that need to be studied. But I also think that examples of demonstrating here's crude materials and then work for the finer. Certainly, it took China the better part of 15 years at China speed to get to where they could have fine textile fiber production. And of course, labor is a sort of a surplus, certainly during that time when they were doing that. And we see it in other parts of the world where they still have a handcrafted hemp fiber textile. You showed a picture earlier. It looks very much like that, where you have one of the Yunma varieties that's being hand harvested and then doing the cross stacking for field writing. But yeah, I really appreciate what you've been saying about this. And so when you think of just you're up in Montana and you have this season ahead, are there, do you have a cohort of grain hemp producers that are already kind of looking at things they might do today before they harvest that are going to lead towards end members? Are you that advanced, or just
we definitely are. So IND Hemp, we actually have a meeting with our growers this week. We're going to have a few industry experts speaking to them that we brought in, as well as our agronomists. But I would say on the fiber side, we don't know anything. And like your point, most organizations would start with an end goal, right, and work backwards. And where we're coming from is a bit different, but it's starting with the idea that we've convinced all these farmers to grow hemp grain. We've got contracts on that grain. It is more profitable for them than dryland wheat in Western Montana. And there is a problem with the straw. And there are markets that are looking for these non-textile grade materials. There are industrial products that we are currently importing and filling those markets. And so if we can learn the techniques, and again, this is why we're approaching this as a first step. We're going to build a facility. We're going to work with that grain straw. And if we can create opportunities for our farmers that give them a second revenue stream, as well as get that residue problem out there for them and create a way to create green products into the market, we see that as a win-win. But we definitely have a lot to learn, and we're looking to network and work with anyone that is educated in the field, because we do have an opportunity. We do have a few thousand acres in different environments, and really we are hoping to establish some practices with the farmers that we can do things at harvest this year and through the winter to learn more as we come online this time next year.
Great. Well, thank you, Greg. I think we'll now look to get questions from the audience organizers, and we'll address it on that side. So thank you for your presentation and for this chat about hemp fiber.
Thank you very much for including us in the discussion.
All right, there we go. So we're going to devote the remainder of the hour. As long as folks are interested and around, please type in your questions so we can. And I'm going to invite all of today's panelists to unmute their microphones so that we can engage in a conversation. And of course, if any of them at home have a barking dog or something like that, we will forgive them. As we look at, just go back up through these questions, and we can go way back to early part. And we had on chat, you all can see a number of questions, and I think when we go back to Tanya's presentation, there was quite a bit of buzz around on animals and such, and I think one question that came to me from Tom was the biomass fed to animals already extracted? And yes. The answer is yes, it's post-extraction. It's actually supplied by local Oregon extractors that have pulled out for their cannabinoids and terpenes. And we do test it, looking at what are the ethanol levels, if that's where it came through and such. So it's tested, and then if it looks like it's fine, it goes to the animals. If actually among the panelists today, do any of you have a question for the other one while I scroll through chat, please?
I'm not sure who else is on here. I think Bill is on here.
Yep. Bill, Jacob, Kevin, Greg. All right. Here we are. Hi, Kevin. I think it's more of a comment. This is from Eric Steenstra about NIST. They've announced a project to improve lab testing of cannabinoids. We also know that USP, ASTM, and we can kind of go through, are all coming up with things. So there's the Canna QAP, right, that's coming up. And then, of course, as you know, we're working with the USDA ARS directly right now, looking at testing and such and how that might impact the RFR, the interim final rules. So any perspective on that, Kevin?
Oh, there's a lot going on right now. We're really excited to see the different results that come out and what different proposals people come up with, and just how they look at it and how they foresee those rules applying to the industry. You know, you look at like GMP rules versus GLP versus, you know, some of the other standards. There's a ton of variation, and the real end goal is quality, but how they get there, that's what'll be so unique to this industry. And like I kind of hinted about in the presentation, you know, I'm pretty sure it'll end up being a plethora of different groups all working together or furthering their own ideals, and we'll end up somewhere along like the pesticide testing in food, where you just kind of know what the rules are and you apply for whatever you want and kind of work your way through each set of guidelines.
Thanks. We have another question. This is from Kim. What books are recommended from beginner to experienced? I don't know of that many books, but certainly what resources would any of you recommend for your particular part? Bill? I think you mentioned there's training and such like that.
Sure. You can, on the internet, if you type in HACCP for hazard analysis critical control points, it will, all the information is free. The basic outline of the program has been in existence for, I guess, over 80 years. It's available on the internet. So, and you can also pull up information on CGMPs, go to the FDA website. So basically the information's all out there. And then we have a safe platform to take these hemp ingredients to finished products and packaged.
Great. Jacob, you know of any, I don't know of any books on hemp extraction yet. It's so new, but there are resources that you would recommend?
Okay. If Jacob's not available, I could speak to that, perhaps.
Sure, go ahead. Thanks, Bill.
Yep. In the food industry, in the food ingredient industry, they've been doing extraction of plant material and spices for decades. So it's quite easy to research. The more international global company platforms use CO2 extraction. So information's out there. go to the primary companies, the major companies, and drill down on their website. There's a lot of information.
I was going to add regarding food, specifically the nutritional profile on hemp seed. There's lots of data on the nutritional makeup of hemp seed oil and hemp hearts, and even the hemp seed whole. That goes back years. I mean, to the 70s. So you can look at old nutrition books, functional nutrition, holistic nutrition, and a lot of functional medicine doctors that have written books on it. So that we do know what the nutritional makeup is of the hemp seed. And it is no secret that it has fantastic nutritional profile. So.
All right. So looking at, again, some other questions that are out there, and that is what, let's see, I lost it, sorry. How much research is currently being done in the US on hemp fiber, all of that. And I know I've been asked by a number of different major companies in the US on the fiber side of things. And I have to say that it really comes down to, do you have hemp fiber stock, like raw stock to work with or in the field? And so it's, of course, we look at what Sunstrand was doing in Kentucky, and now we just heard, from Greg on that. Greg, do you have any idea of an answer for that question about research on fiber hemp in the US? Do you need to be unmuted, Greg? If you're still there. All right. Well, we'll leave that. Sorry. There's a question on any information on hemp plastic. Who would like to take that one on?
Jay?
Yeah.
In the on the food side, corn, derivatives of corn are used or have been used, I guess, in the creation of plastics, and so there's no reason why hemp can't be some research and development in that area, and I'm sure that there are applications, mainly getting to the companies that do the basic research and development. So should be a good application in the future. Yep.
Got it. All right, so there's in the chat, Tom Germany mentions a good resource for hemp plastic. I know there's a couple of startups just in my neighborhood here that are looking at hemp-based plastics and other bioplastics. And again, if it comes from a derivative that they make into a high-density polyethylene or such, it's still plastic, and it still degrades, has a life cycle that is equivalent to plastic. It's when you intentionally formulate it such that it can break up, but then you end up with nanoplastics, which as a soil scientist, not particularly thrilled about. And it just depends on what that plastic is holding. So there's probably a lot of research that needs to go into that in the bio-based plastics. There are, of course, exceptions to what I just said, but that in general we have to think, where could these products go? They could come from the stock potentially, from digestion of a particular, let's say the herd and even the cellulose. Bast fibers, not so sure, but certainly the seed oil, and then could be going into that. There's if again, any questions, please write them in. Any of the panelists, again, please ask each other questions, something somebody said that would be quite appropriate, as we do have the time.
Just throwing it out there for potential use of non-food grade oil is adhesives, and that's really interesting because, as you know, Jay, the proteins in the oil are very robust, and I know that there's some research being done in that area. So imagine if we could get away from petroleum-based adhesives into a plant-based solution. And we are having a challenge of not getting food grade grain to processing, and that having that as a channel to move oil, grain, and fiber, or I'm sorry, for meal would be huge. I mean, to have 3M have hemp adhesive would be incredible.
Yeah. So we have a couple of faculty in our engineering school who've been working on various oil seed based adhesives, and they've added hemp into that, and we see that at a number of other spots in Kentucky and elsewhere in the US where people have been working with that. Yeah, exactly, adhesives. And yes, 3M has certainly needs to be looking at that. When we look at the sort of we have the chicken and egg, on fiber. We kind of have that with grain. CBD's been able to pull with that sector of hemp forward. There's in terms of processing. Anybody see things that are out there that, of course, you all have expressed some sort of wish list, but given what you've heard this morning, something's changed in the last week since we talked. What any other thoughts you would like to share with the attendees this morning? I can go around the list. Tanya?
On the nutritional and the food side, I would say, a challenge with consumers is the taste of hemp meal. It's very strong. It's very earthy. I know we're going to hear from Chad Rosen, I think maybe next week, on what he is, what he's working on, which is kind of a mild neutral protein, but that would be huge to have a plant-based, hemp-based protein that actually is usable in all these value-added products, and to retain the nutritional profile. And for us, education and marketing is a challenge because, again, the consumer and the end customer is just very confused about what cannabis is, what marijuana is, what hemp is, what an edible is, food, and really clarifying that across all aspects of hemp is going to be a challenge. So That's what I have for the nutritional side. And then also for the hemp meal, really need to find homes for that and figure out where that can go. So that animal market and research there is really huge to be able to get AFCO approved and the FDA to approve it as well.
Great. I'll go to Greg next. Greg, you have thoughts you want to share?
Can you, I apologize, I just got back on late.
That's all right. So just any last thoughts you wanted to impart? You know, because for all of you, I edited down your session and I thought I brought in the more important things. So, you know, what do you think? Anything else you want to add this morning?
Yeah, I'd say on the using grain straw for fiber, it's exciting. I will share, I'm actually in Montana with the group. We had a meeting with farmers yesterday, and we actually brought in some experts. We brought in Trey Riddle, who's an expert in fiber, to actually have a first conversation with our farmers about retting and harvest techniques. And it was interesting after preparing for the presentation and then seeing really the communication, the implementation on the ground, and how the farmers reacted. And much as we expected, some of the techniques that might yield a better fiber don't necessarily sit well immediately with a grain farmer that's mostly a wheat farmer that's looking for, you know, how can I do something useful with this straw residue, but not essentially farm another crop? Or, you know, the idea of laying down retting and turning that retting, that's something that a lot of these guys, you know, they'd love to just bail it off and get it gone. So it's interesting. We're, you know, learning curve. It's exciting to see it happen at the farm level and the processing level as we move this industry forward.
Got it. Kevin?
Oh, I was just answering a question in the chat about standardization.
I
guess I could answer that real quick here instead of typing it out. You know, we really don't have much standardization from state to state, much less, you know, from lab to lab, even here in the state we're in. So the best recommendation if you want standardization is to use the same lab that you can, you know, just keep using the same group. Like I said in my presentation, communication, ask them questions, get them to tell you stuff. The lab's a great resource of information. Often it's free of charge, so feel free to reach out. And, you know, the more you educate the lab, the more the lab can educate other people too. So it just helps the industry in a whole.
Yeah, yeah. And Joy, as in the chat, you all can read that again about the CANA QAP. Again, that's NIST, that's a government agency. Of course, we interact with them, USDA, DEA, FDA in that space. So those standards will come up, and then of course there's going to be all sorts of other processes, and of course you have APA and USP, et cetera, that all are interacting in this space. So again, looking at building those standards as we have in many other things. So a question, if we look at, so I want to follow up, make sure everyone's had an opportunity. Jacob, if you're there, did you want to have anything else to say? And if not, Bill?
Yes, thank you, Jay. A project that we've taken on through the Association of Western Hemp Professionals is to first of all, work with the state of Idaho from a legislative perspective and help with legislation, and also working with states that in transportation of biomass, the issue around what is it that you're transporting. If it's not ground material, then it smells like marijuana, looks like marijuana, might be on stems, might be stripped. So we're helping to define from a law enforcement perspective, starting here in Oregon at the state level, to define a precise process for setting up loads of biomass and locking it down with composite testing throughout the load, documentation, and paperwork at a higher level than they've offered to speak with their counterparts in bordering states. So perhaps we can be the nucleus of starting a floating system that helps answer the questions when law enforcement stops a load of hemp. Keeps drivers out of jail, keeps trucks from being impounded and product from ultimately being destroyed, because it takes such a long time to work these cases through the court system. So that's an effort that in fact, we're on a call today. So we're well down the path on flushing this out for the industry. And it's been submitted, the plan's been submitted to USDA at the federal level also. Thank you, Jay.
Okay, great. All right, well, I think we're now close enough to the end of our session. I want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you so much for your valuable time involved in this. Really appreciate it. Tanya, Kevin, Jacob, Bill, and Greg, you're all great. Thank you so much. Again, please, everyone who's still on, get on the survey, fill that out. We really need that. And because that's gonna help drive next week's. And we'll see you for that, the focus groups. And we look forward to engaging you one more time and move this ahead. Thank you to everyone for your participation. Abdel, Monique, you want to sign us out? Go ahead. Thank you.
Jay, thank you. I just want to say we have one other session on August 4th before the focus group. So we'll have somebody from USDA talk about the regulations, and we'll have 4 panel discussions.
All right. Okay. Take care, everyone. See you next time.